Okay, we were in chapter 7, verse 23 when we ended. And I think we were about through with verse 23 actually. But verses 23 through 25 shows that Christ is a high priest that has no successor. And there in verse 23, he tells us that truly there were many priests because they were not suffered to continue by reason of death. The Aaronic priesthood were compelled to transfer their priesthood to someone else, and that's because of death. They, as all men do, die, and as a result they could not continue as high priest, so it would pass to the next eldest or next in line. The word continue, interesting word, which means literally to remain alongside or to remain nearby with someone. And so the idea is that when the Aaronic priests died, they were not able to remain alongside of those to whom they were ministering, or for whom they were ministering. During their ministry, they remained alongside those people. They lived with them and everything else. They're no longer able to remain alongside of those individuals, and that's the idea of continue. They're not able to continue because of death. But verse 24, but this man, because he continueth ever, hath an unchangeable priesthood. The word unchangeable here is a word which means not stepping across. And thus, the idea is it is not transferable. And that again, the aspect is it is not passed from or transferred from one individual to another individual. As the high priest in the Aaronic priesthood would transfer his high priesthood to someone else, Christ has an unchangeable, a non-transferable priesthood. Cannot be transferred to anyone else. Can you think of a modern day application of this?
Of unchangeable priesthood?
Of this principle. Yeah. What do you have with Catholicism? When the Pope dies, what happens?
He has a changeable priesthood.
It is a changeable priesthood. The Pope is supposedly standing in the place of Christ here upon this earth. But yet it's a changeable priesthood. And this is saying it could not be a changeable priesthood. Destroys the whole concept of the papacy in relationship to the Catholic Church. And by the way, that's kind of what I meant by we know a lot of things, we have the knowledge of them, but a lot of times we don't make the application. We don't think about that. That's the same thing I've been saying in relationship to these Jews as to what Paul was writing.
You saying we need more dexterous minds? Is that what you're saying? Application, or our minds?
We don't make the application of what we know.
Mm-hmm.
They knew certain facts, but they did not make the application of those facts. They didn't make the application, for example, that when they read Zechariah 6, here's one who is priest and king, that you can't have that here upon earth. And we'll get into that later on, but They didn't understand. They didn't make the application when they read the 110th Psalm in verse 4 that thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. They didn't make the application of it. They knew the fact, but they didn't make the application. We know the fact. The priesthood could not be changeable. Yet, could we make the application to papacy and show the error? That's what I'm saying. A lot of times we will know facts, but we don't make the application of those facts. That's the problem, and that's what Paul was dealing with here. He was showing, here's the application of those things that you know and have accepted for years. And that's the same type of a principle. So verse 25. Wherefore he is able to save them to the uttermost that come to God, unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them. Wherefore, one of those conclusion words, like therefore, wherefore. It is saying, based on what has been said, based on these things, here's a conclusion. So he's now going to set forth the conclusion of this that he's been saying. He is able. This is the Greek word dunamai. And I think we're probably all familiar with that Greek word, aren't we? Dunamis, dunamai, power, strength. So he is able, he has the power, he has the ability to save them to the uttermost. To the uttermost is a word which means entirely, completely, totally. He is able to save totally. He's able to save entirely or completely. Save them to the uttermost. Now then, why is this important to the Jews? Well, the Jews had been offering sacrifices all through these 1,500 years. Were those sacrifices able to save them? No. They had to do what every year? Offer that sacrifice again every year. Why? Because there was a remembrance again made every year of all of their sins. They always came back, and thus the Jew always knew the sins were there. They were never truly forgiven, totally. And so we come to Christ now, and he's saying, Christ is the one who is able to save totally, completely, or entirely. These sins are not brought back to remembrance. Whereas the Jewish, in the sacrifices they made, yes, they were forgiven for a year, but their sins would come back upon them every year. Not going to happen with Christ. He saves totally or completely. Wuest has said on this, by reason of Messiah's eternal ministry as high priest, he is able to save the believer in his totality of being, body, soul, and spirit, and do all to the point of termination, an unending state of salvation in eternity. So he takes it on not only from the standpoint of right now, but on into he's able to save us eternally in heaven. And so he is able to save us to the uttermost, completely or totally, not just partially, as was seen under that Mosaic system. So he's able to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him. How do we come to God? Through Christ, isn't it? Remember what Jesus said, John 14 and verse 6?
I am the way, the truth, and the life.
No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He is the only access that we have to the Father. That's also what Paul's later on going to say in chapter 11 and verse 6. Without faith it is impossible to please him, for he that what? Cometh to God.
Must believe that he is.
And he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So, in order to come to God, you must do what? You must believe. Well, we come to God how? Through Christ. That's the only way in which we can come to him. The word intercession. He ever liveth to make intercession for us, for them, is from a word which means to make an earnest request through contact with the person approached, or to approach or appeal to someone. And that's an actual definition, lexical definition. It is thus, you're making contact you're coming to this individual to make contact with another individual. That's intercession. He is interceding on your behalf. I want to make contact with so-and-so. What do? I go to this other person to get to that individual. And thus interceding for someone. We come to Christ come to God by Christ. How? Through his being our intercessor. We come to Christ to get to the Father. And through that, then, we have total or complete forgiveness and salvation.
What is Romans 8:26 saying when he helps our infirmities? Because we know not what we should pray for as we ought. What is that saying? Is that
well, that would be a good study. That would be a good study for you to go into, and you could, why not, write a paper on that? Yes, sweet.
When you stick your foot in your mouth, you get the under the foot, huh?
Dale, that's a total nother study that I don't want to get into this morning. They don't have time for it. And that's dealing with the Holy Spirit helping our infirmities. Okay, verses 26 through verse 28 then. His is a sinless priesthood. Verse 26, for such a high priest became us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens. The word became us. Interesting word. For such a high priest became us. It is a Greek word which means fitting, suitable, or proper. We have a high priest that is fitting or suitable for us.
Would became mean represent us? Same thing?
No, one who is fitting or suitable for us.
Okay.
It shows his capability, but maybe a good illustration, maybe not an exact parallel, but a good illustration would be the woman in relationship to man. God said, I will make a helpmeet, what? One who is suitable for a man. Well, here he became us, what? He is suitable for us as a high priest. And that's what the idea would basically be the same. It is the fitness that he has to be that high priest, then, is in these qualities that he mentions here. And we have talked about Greek tenses. We talked about present tense, the aorist tense, perfect tense. Well, I'll introduce another one to you, imperfect. The It's an imperfect tense here. Imperfect means repeated action, whereas present tense would be continuous. This is a repeated action. First, he lists who is holy. Now, I know that all of you have heard me preach about the word holy. It means what?
Set apart.
Set apart. That's not the word here. That's the Greek word hagios. The Greek word that's used holy here is hosios, or hosios, however it be pronounced, just to show you the difference. I think it's iOS, yeah, as opposed to a hagios. That's the word that's used here, hosios, not hagios. It is dealing with one's personal holiness, that of one who is undefiled by sin, one who's free of wickedness. Not so much the idea of set apart, even though, and of course these are closely related terms, but the idea of hagios is one who has been set apart for something. This deals with one who is free of sin. In Trench's synonyms of the New Testament, he puts it, hosios is one careful of his duties toward God, where hagios would be one who is set apart for God. And I say similar ideas, but variation a little bit as to the emphasis. So he's one who is holy. What is it? He is one who is undefiled by sin, as used here. Now then, we could make a comparison. What about the Levitical priest? What did they have to do? They had to sacrifice for their own sins prior to making a sacrifice for the sins of the people. Every year on the Day of Atonement, they went in. We noticed at least twice, and up to as many as 4 times on that day, depending on how you view things. Why the first time? To make sacrifice for his own sins. Did this one have to do that? No. Now, what happened with the Levitical priest? He became holy by that sacrifice, even as the people would become holy by the sacrifice that he made for them. Well, this one didn't have to make that type of sacrifice for himself because he was already holy. Then we have the word harmless. It is a Greek word which means no evil or no ill will. It is one that is without malice.
When I think of harmless, I think of a baby, a toddler, not a toddler, but an infant, newborn.
Well, they would be harmless in that sense. They would not have evil within them. And that would be something, evil would be something that they would learn over time. Because they're not born with it. It is something that is developed by generally their environment or the people that are teaching them. But here, harmless. He is without evil, without malice, or without ill will. Undefiled. Thayer defines this word as free from that by which the nature of a thing is deformed or debased, or its force and vigor impaired. The nature of a thing is deformed or debased. It's not that. It's free from that.
You shorten that definition? I can't write all that.
I was just gonna look. So what does that mean?
That means undefiled.
That's what I thought. Could be what it says.
No, you think of something that is deformed.
Not deformed, how's that?
It's not deformed. Or something that is debased. What do we think of if we think of something that's debased?
Really terrible. Evil.
Evil, wickedness, man that has fallen from the state that God created him in.
Stinking to the, obnoxious to the senses.
Okay, that would being obnoxious to the senses, any of those type of things. Well, that's free from that. And thus, Christ was free from that deformity. He was free from being debased. And I think the latter part of Thayer's definition, or its force or vigor impaired. He still had all of the force, all of the vigor that he originally had. It was not deformed. Now, how would it have been deformed? Of course, by sin. Then he says, separate from sinners. Those words up here, because we're going to go back to a couple of words that you should be familiar with. But first, this is a perfect participle. Now, what does perfect mean? We're talking about verbs.
Past action with continuous result.
Okay. Past action or completed action with continuing results. That's what this word is, separate. It is a perfect participle. He is separate and remains separate. Literally would maybe translating it, having been separated from sinners. Or even if you wanted more force of the perfect, having been and continues to be separated from sinners. Word from. E, and then a ek and apo. Remember those words? You should by now. We studied them more specifically in 5:7. What is ek? Out from within. What's apo?
The edge of.
Okay, out from the edge of. How we used a circle to define it. Apo would be from the edge of. Ek would be that way. You're in something. Would it have been proper for Paul to use out or separate ek from sinners?
No.
Why? You're right. That's exactly it. He would have been in sin then. He's out from the edge of sin. He wasn't in sin himself. He came out from the edge of sin. Remember what I've been talking and stressing throughout? The precision of language. You see that here again. He never was within sin himself. He just came out, or he was separated from the edge of sinners. And that again shows us the aspect of he is one who is free of all sin. That takes us back to chapter 4, isn't it? Verse 14. Tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin. It's emphasizing it here in a different way. He's separate from sinners. And then he is higher than the heavens. Again, we see that, well, I said 4:14 before, that wasn't, it was 4:15, that he is one who's in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. That's 15. Now then, higher than the heavens is verse 14. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who has, or that has passed into the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Well, now then, he is higher than the heavens. And if you remember when we were talking about chapter 4 and verse 14, when it talks about he has passed into the heavens, it was literally passed through the heavens. And you remember our discussion then? What is it? There were 3 heavens. He's passed through the heavens and what? Into that dwelling place of God. The 3rd heaven, as we would refer to it. Now then, he's higher than the heavens. What is it? Here's this 1st heaven, the 2nd heaven. 1st heaven, of course, being our atmosphere. The 2nd heaven being where the stars would dwell. He's higher than that. And if you wanted to study some other passages along this line, Ephesians 4 and verse 10, Mark 16 and verse 19, Acts 2 and verse 33, Acts 5 and verse 31, Romans 8 and verse 34. So there's a few others to study along that line. So that is this high priest as opposed to the Levitical priest. Now then, verse 27, who needeth not daily as those high priests to offer up sacrifices first for his own sins and then for the people's. For this he did once when he offered up himself. Notice the contrast that is presented at the first part of the verse, needeth not daily. Latter part of the verse, he did once. Daily as opposed to once. Now then, I'm not going to get into a discussion of this, but if y'all wanted to get into a deeper study in regards to this aspect, who needeth not daily? Did the high priest offer sacrifices daily? It was once a year.
Yeah, but he daily offered the evening and morning.
Well, not the high priest. Not the high priest.
Yeah,
High priest work was once a year to go into that most holy place to offer sacrifices for people's sins. Now then, how can it be daily?
because they had the daily sacrifices, evening morning sacrifices. Mentions it in Leviticus 1 through 4, 6.
But that's not the context of what this is being, of what we were reading here. We have a high priest.
High priest's sons.
His sons, the other priest, would do the morning and evening services. Not the high priest himself. A high priest, and that's the discussion of Hebrews 7. The high priest, well, in the Old Testament, high priest was once a year going into the and not daily. It's a problem passage. There's been some various solutions offered. I'm not sure that I really know the answer.
See, it's pretty plain. It says, who needeth not daily, like those high priests. Ain't that, isn't that enough?
as those high priests. Well, the problem is, though, those high priests did not offer sacrifices daily. They did it once a year.
You know, that's it. That's it.
That's the problem. That's why I said it is a problem. It's a difficulty in relationship to the passage itself. But, and I'm not sure that I have an answer. There are several that have been offered.
Maybe it's
Well,
implying that he did it
that-
through his sons, through his family.
That's a possibility, I guess, but that's why I said, if you want to study it on your own, that's something you can delve into. I don't want to really try and get into and try to look at all the variations of it this morning. But you see the contrast that is made, and that's the important. The daily as opposed to once. And the Levitical priest did it first, or the high priest, for his own sins. And you might study Leviticus 4 and verse 3. That says, if the priest that is appointed to do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his own sin, which he hath sinned, a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. Or chapter 16 and verse 6, verse 11 and verse 15. Had to offer sins for his own self first. Then he could offer the sins for the people. But the word once here, this he did once, is a word which means literally once for all. Or once for all time even. But again, this would not be for his own sins. Why? Because he's separated from sin. So it was not offering for his own sins, but for the sins of the people. Now then, anyone else, can you think of another application of this? Can you think of two applications of this? Well, let me give you a hint on one of them. Catholicism again.
Right.
What do they do in the Mass in Catholicism? They're basically, Christ is being offered up anew. Wait a minute. He offered himself once for all time. Now, second application. Have you ever heard people at the Lord's Supper, as they are giving thanks for the bread or the fruit of the vine, thanking God for offering himself up again or anew? Or that somehow Christ, when we partake of the Lord's Supper, is being sacrificed again? There's certain brethren who believe that or use that terminology. That's what Lutherans believe, basically, in relationship to the Lord's Supper.
You think they actually believe that, or they're just saying something that they heard somebody else say?
I would say a lot of Christians, the latter, that they've heard something and they've repeated it. Yeah,
Don't think about it.
and don't think about it. But in reality, it is shown to be false by what is stated here. Yeah.
So they don't study it, they just do what they
That's the problem. We don't study too often. Verse 28 then, for the law maketh men high priests which hath infirmity. But the word of the oath, which was since the law, maketh the Son, who is consecrated forevermore. Infirmity. Have you ever heard people praying for those who are sick and infirmed? What does it mean?
Those who are frail and weak.
Well, the word infirmity here means sickness or disease or illness. Those who are ill, those who are diseased and sick thus. So, the law maketh men high priests that are what? Sick or infirmed or diseased. But the word of oath, which since the law maketh, is not in the original. It's the Son. So the word of the oath, which is since the law, the Son, who is consecrated forevermore. Consecrated is this Greek word teleoo. Remember it? What does it mean? How's it usually translated?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, that's right. And it's dealing with being complete or mature. And guess what tense it's in?
Perfect.
Perfect tense. It's a perfect tense, which is completed action with continuing results. So he has been consecrated. He has been perfected. Having been perfected and with continuing results, he continues to be perfected. Now, in what regard? The sacrifice that he offered was complete. It was full. It did not need repeating. He is a high priest that does not need cleansing, and he has been perfected, consecrated forever. Chapter 8. In verses 1 through 6, he officiates at a better tabernacle. In verse 1, Christ is set a priest in heaven. Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such a high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. The phrase, in the things which we have spoken, would be better translated in the case of. Now, in the case of those things that we have spoken, here's the conclusion. Another one of those aspects. The reference, though, is not to what he has just discussed, but in matters, all of the things that he has discussed, not just the immediate things. So it deals with that which is going to go in the next few verses, to the matters to be considered. This is the sum. The word sum means the principal thing, or the chief thing. Here's the main point. And again, it refers to what is going to follow this, not what has gone before. So he's basically giving us the conclusion first. And then he's going to tell us what it is. So here's the conclusion of what I'm about to say. A high priest who is set on the throne. This takes us back to Zechariah 6, verses 12 and 13. And in particular, verse 13. But it does go back to verse 12, and we'll start dealing with that a little bit this morning and then probably finish it next week. But Zechariah 6 and verse 12. And speak unto him, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, saying, Behold, the man whose name is the branch. Now, if we had time, we would study the aspect of the branch and how that it goes back to the aspect of David, and then even back to Abraham, and even back to before that. But the man who is the branch, and he shall grow up out of his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. Even he shall build the temple of the Lord. Now, what is the temple? What's the temple of the Lord? The church. Yeah. Passages such as 1 Corinthians 3 and the 1 Corinthians 6 show us that the church is, or the temple is the church. So even he shall build the temple of the Lord. And he shall bear the glory. And we could probably spend a great deal of time just looking at that aspect. But going on, he shall sit and rule upon his throne, and he shall be a priest upon his throne, and the council of peace shall be between them both. He's going to be a priest. Where? Upon his throne. Just as an aside here, the Revised Standard said that, I believe it's Revised Standard, is one that says that he shall be a priest beside his throne. And they separate the two ideas.
What kind of this teaching are they trying to put in there?
Premillennial teaching. That he is not priest and king at the same time.